This is Gemara Yevamos Daf Ayin Zayin. All the learning has been generously sponsored. That is an incredible schos for Shlema for Chadvalei Abbas Saradina Mir Tishem. The learning the entire Chabura should bring Chadvalei Abbas Saradina a complete Refuah Shalema Be'Karoiv, as well as learning should be a schoshev Yisrael and Devar Tamziva Zerachos Shamlu Bizavha Oivik Bentali Shemim and Chayav Lemudis Bas Asima Malka, as well as learning should be a schoshev Shalem Shal Yosef and Yervedish Moment Tilat Nam Tzalzim and Chlas and Chom Basriva Sar Bluma Bas Mendel Chaimosh Yishuv and Malka Shavim Shechana Besoich Shar Chayli Yisrael. We're holding in the bottom of Ayin Vav Amid Peace. We just finished figuring out why is David HaMelech mutter kosher to come into Klal Yisrael because the famous drasha says Avner Amoini v'lei Amoinis Mayavi v'lei Mayavis, and says the Gemara 7 lines to the bottom based upon that drasha Elameata Mamzer v'lei Mamzeres. Are you going to tell me the same thing, that only a male Mamzer is also but a female Mamzeres is mutter because of the same drasha? Answers the Gemara, no. Mamzer ksiv mumzar. It says Mamzer is the word itself teaches mumazar, that is a mum, it is a blemish onto the person, therefore both male and female. Ask the Gemara further, mitzivlei mitzris shiny achad and parshtaim they cross. Says the Gemara, you cannot say that. The reason why Amayni and Mayavis is different, so we're giving a new teretz. It's not just the drush of Amayni v'lei Amaynis, Mayavi v'lei Mayavis, but rather explains the Gemara, the reason is the reason is because when Klal Yisrael came close, they did not provide them with provisions of bread and water. And explains the Gemara, Darkoi shalish lekadim. V'lo dark shalish lekadim. It's not the derech of a woman to go out to feed food to them in the streets. And therefore, explains the Gemara, the men were punished and not the woman. And therefore, the woman, the female Moyavis and Amoines are mutter. Ask Dayig 1 second. Hayolam lekadim anashim likras anashim. V'nashim likras nashim. Ask Dayig 1 second. Why did the men go greet the men with food and water? Why did the woman go greet the woman? What happened? Ishtik, Avner was quiet. Miyad right away. Immediately Shaul, the king, said, this is what you're asking who the kid is. So let's remember, we're going to have to come back to this question. Avner did not respond. Why did the female Moyavis and Amoinis not go out and greet the females amongst Klal Yisrael? But it says the Gemara, based upon the pasuk that Shaul just responded, Hasam yesterday Karli Nar, Karli Allah. Elam, there are 2 psukim. Why in one pasuk is David HaMelech referred to as a nar, a lad, and here in Elam, a youth? Explains the Gemara, this is what Shaul was telling Avner. Halacha nisalma mimcha. The halacha is hidden from you. Tzei v'shal beis hamedrash. You Avner, you're not sure. You were stumped. You didn't know. Why did the female Amayni and Moavis go out and greet Klal Yisrael and give to the women folk? Go and ask in the beis hamedrash what the halacha is. So Shaul Avner asked, Amrulei, and they responded, Amayni v'lei Amaynis, Mayavi v'lei Mayavis. Continues the Gemara, continues the narrative on the top of Ayin Zayin and Aleph. So Dayig asked all the questions that he just asked, and what happened is Shtiku in the beis hamedrash. They also didn't answer. They also didn't know why didn't the female Amayni and Mayavis go out and greet Klal Yisrael. So what happened? They wanted to announce that David HaMelech is possible. Can you imagine David HaMelech? They wanted to announce that he's possible. He comes from Rus. He comes from a woman who's not allowed to marry into Klal Yisrael. But miyad, what happened? Says the Gemara. Let's go back to the psukim. Va'amasa ben ish ushma Yisra Yisraeli, and Amasa the son of a man named Yisraeli. Asher ba'al Avigail bas Nachash, who is together with Abigail, the daughter of Nachash. Uksev in the pasuk says, Yeser Yishmaeli Amar Rava Rava Darshis. Melamed, you know we learned from this pasuk. Shechiger Charbo Yishmael. He pulled out his sword. He girded his sword like a Yishmael Vamar, and he said, Call me Sheina Shaimea Lachazu. Whoever is not listening, you still have the audacity to question if David HaMelech is kosher. Yidkar Becharev. You should be pierced by this sword, impaled by the sword. Why? Because Kach Mekablani Beis Dina Shel Shmuel Ramasi Amoni V'Laimanis Mavel Ma'avis. Says the Gemara, cause we have a Messiah. You're asking a question, what about the female Mayavis? What about the female Aminis? We have a tradition, we have a Messiah. Amoni V'Lai Ma'avis, Aminis Mayavi V'Lai Mayavis. Ask the Gemara, 1 second, this Yeser, who's claiming that he heard from his Rabbeim, but Amima Haman, is he believe Amar Rav Abba Merav called Hamachachash Marlacha Ba? Im Koidim Amaisa Amra Shaimim Lai. If a Talmud Chacham comes and says, this is the halacha, before that there was a story, before there's a situation, of course we listen to him. But V'im Lav. But if not, Ein Shaimim Lai, if he's only telling over the halacha, after there's already a situation, after trying to figure it out, then we do not listen to him. So ask the Gemara, why was Yeser believed? Explains the Gemara, you know why? Shmuel Hanavi was still alive. So they could have went and asked the Beis Din, and that's the reason why Yeser is believed, and that's why ultimately we know that David HaMelech is allowed, and is kosher, of course, because Amayni v'lai Amaynis. But I asked the Gemara, we never answered the Kasha, 12 lines down, Mikoma Kam Kasha. We never answered the Kasha. Why didn't the female Amayni Mayavis go out? Seemingly there was no issue. Seemingly the females could go to the females. What's the big deal? Let them go out in the streets and feed them. Explains the Gemara, a fundamental answer that Klal Yisrael has to know, says the Gemara. You know, we learned, you're right. The females seemingly are going to the females. It seems all kosher. It seems it's only woman, but still it's inappropriate, says the Gemara. The honor of the princess is within, and therefore explains the Gemara, for eternity, the Amaynis, the Mayavis are yes allowed to marry Klal Yisrael, and it's not a taina. Wait, why didn't you go out and provide the Yiddish girls with food? Because it's not the mahalach, it's not the way. Called kevoidim as well or places in the house. Therefore, we can never falter for not having a public display, even if it's only amongst females. Says the Gemara, another passage. The malachim asked Avram, "We are sorry, your wife." What did Avram answer? Avram, she's in the tent. That is the place of a woman. So that is the finality, and that is where we see the David HaMelech, of course, kosher to come into Klal Yisrael, because Mayavis and Amaynis, Rosa Mayavi, was indeed kosher to be Megayer. Says the Gemara, based on what we just said, as Rashi points out, a little bit of an interesting ketanai over here, but rather that there is a difference in Amayni and the two different drushes where we learn it out from is a machlekes Tanai. Amayni v'lai Amanis ma'avim l've'avis tiv Rav Yehuda. Rav Shimon Aimer al dvar shelo yikidim eschem v'lech mayim dark shalish lekadim and dark lish lekadim. So two different sources where we learn out the din from. And Darish Rava Darshins, once we're on the topic of David HaMelech talking, what is the meaning of the pasuk in Tehillim that says David HaMelech, Pitach T'olamos Serai. Of course we see this as well. In Hallel, he released my straps. Amar Dagel Nekadish Baruch Hu Rebbeinu Shalaylam. Shnei Masarai Shayal Shnei Masarai Shayalai Pitachtem. Says David HaMelech to Hashem, there were two straps, two burdens that are upon me. And you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, released them. What were they? Rosa Mayavi, V'na'ama Hamoyanis. Darash Rava Darshins. Furthermore, we're about 20 lines down. The first one is Darish. Ma'idach, what is the meaning of the pasuk? Rabbi say, Sisa Ata Hashem Elokai Nevloisecha Machshosecha Eleinu. So much you did, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Your wonders, your thoughts are all for us. Elai loy namar. Doesn't say it in the singular. Elai leinu, to us. What does this teach us? Rechavam was sitting within by David HaMelech and saying, it's for us that these psukim are written, these psukim that are allowing the Mayavis and Amaynis to come into Klal Yisrael. Darish Rava, another drasha, what is the meaning of the pasuk? Says the pasuk, bold, I'm coming with the book of the scroll written for me. Amar David, Kosav Alai. Amar David, says David HaMelech. Ani amarti atabasi, says David HaMelech, I said I'm going to come now. V'lo yadati, and I didn't know Shemegillah Sefer Kosav Alai. I didn't know that it was already written about me. What does this mean? Explains Rava. Hasam ksiv animsai zachim ksiv matzasi. Over here it says matzasi David Avdi b'shem kashi mishachtev, an allusion to the eventual anointment and kingdom of David HaMelech. Amar Ula. Now that really ends the discussion from yesterday. The lengthy discussion, the famous discussion of David HaMelech marrying into Klal Yisrael, of course being a kosher yid, because of Amonis and Moyavis. Now Amar Ula comes like Ula, 7 lines from the Y lines, and Ayin Zayim of Aleph, and goes back really to original discussion. And says Ula, Amar Rav Yochanan Bas Ger Amoini Ksher Likuna. We have a daughter of a male Amoini, is kosher to kuna. She is allowed to marry a kohen. And Rashi over here fills in the missing details that says, Rashi, that we think right now what's going on over here is we have an Amoini and Amoinis that are Megayer, the two of them. Then they have relations and they give birth to a child. That child is what we are discussing. The child born of a union between Amoini and Amoinis, says Ula in the name of Rav Yochanan, that child is allowed to marry into Kahuna. Amar lei Rava bar Ula Lula Keman. Who are you holding like that you're saying this child can marry into the kahuna? Again, a child born from an Amoini and Amoinis that were Megayer. Iki Rav Yehuda. If you're like Rav Yehuda, Ha'amar bas ger zach bas chol zach. Can't be, because Rav Yehuda holds that a child born from a ger zachar is the din of Aser, has the din of a chalal. So of course over here, if the father is an Amoini or Mayavi, which of course are Aser, the child, according to Rav Yehuda, takes on the din of the father. Vikar Rav Yosi Pshita. And if it's going like Rav Yosi, it's obvious that it's kosher. What's the chiddush? Why? Amar, what does Rav Yosi say? Rav Yosi goes extreme, not just Amoini and Mayavis. Any ger that marries a geiris, Rav Yosi held, the daughter is kosher likuna. So too over here, the halacha is going to be that even though, of course, the chiddush being normally a geiris herself is puzzle to kuna. But Rav Yosi holds that when the Geiris and the Ger have a child, that child is purified, that child can marry to Kuna. So says the Gemara in our case, when we know the Mayavis is of course kosher, certainly it's Pasha according to Rav Yosi that kids should be able to marry into Kuna. So who is the Chiddush that Ula is saying in the name of Rav Yochanan that the Ger, that this daughter born from the union of a Ger of Amoinis and Amoini, or Mayavis and Mayavi, are going to be kosher Kuna? Perhaps you're going to say, maybe you're saying the chiddush over here is that maybe Rav Yosi only said his din with people that could marry into Klal Yisrael. But this case, the Amoini, the father, the father is also to marry into Klal Yisrael. I would have thought that maybe the child is not allowed to marry a kohen. So minolei. Where would you know this point of distinction? Where would you know to suggest that the din of Rav Yosi is only by ger and geiris who are kosher to marry into Klal Yisrael, and not by Amoini or Moyavi who are also to marry into Klal Yisrael? Says the Gemara, you know where I would have thought it from? The Aleph, I would have learned it out from Mi Kohen Gadol Ba'almana. My Kohen Gadol Ba'almana Shkin B'yasei Be'avira. A Kohen Gadol and Almana that are together, of course, it's a forbidden union. A Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry a woman whose husband died in Almana. And yet, what shall we see? We should see from Kohen Gadol and Almana that even though the Hava Mina is Yishana from Kohen Gadol and Almana, that since they're not royal to come into Klal Yisrael and they're pasal tikuna, so maybe the same din should be by us. That since the Moyavi is not royal to come to Klal Yisrael, the child should be pasal, and the chiddush would be kosher. Says the Gemara, you can't prove that because Almana l'Kohen Gadol is aser. Over here, the Amoini to the Moyavis is kosher. Answers the Gemara, chalul teichiach. No, learn out from a chalul, because a chalul is going to prove to us, as Rashi here points out, Shemoter b'bas Yisrael, and the bia itself is not bavera, and yet the child is pasul. Explains the Gemara, no, malchoshkin tzirasa bavera, but a chalul, the creation of the chalul is bavera because the parents were aser. Kohen Gadol yochiach v'chazar din lo rizev lo yirizeh krizeh. So we learn out from Almana Kohen Gadol and the Chalal, the two entities are going to prove to us She'enoi B'roi V'Akol Ubitoi Psula, and the child is possible. Avkan She'enoi B'roi V'Akol Ubitoi Psula. So that would be the source for the Hava Amina, that the child is going to be forbidden, and that's going to be the Chiddush of Ula in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that no, the Bitoi, the daughter of the Ger and Geris of Amoni and Mayavis, is going to be kosher. Says the Gemara, what's your makar? In both halves of your makar, of the Kohen Gadol, of the Chalal, there was an element of an Aveira. Whether the Amana was forbidden to the Kohen Gadol, whether the Chalal's parents, the child was born by Aveira. So what's the proof to us? Tilma, the year of the word Vadai. So we go back and we say, what was the statement of Ula in the name of Rabbi Yochanan? A totally new din. The statement of Ula in the name of Rabbi Yochanan was not the Pasker Zachar Kibas Chalal Zachar. Was not that Ger Amayni is Ksher Lakuna. It's a new statement. But rather, what is Ula teaching us? Ula is teaching us an Amayni that marries into Klal Yisrael, which of course is Ofser, because Amayni cannot come into Klal Yisrael. Afal Gav to be Yosei Ba'avera, 3 lines from the bottom. Still Bita Kshera. That's the Chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan, that an Amayni, a Mayavi, are not allowed to marry to Klal Yisrael. But if they do, the child is going to be kosher. Amar Lei responds, Ula in, that is indeed the Chiddush of Rav Yochanan, the Chas Rabban Rav Yochanan, Bas Gera, Amayni, Bas Mitzri, Sheni, Rav Yochanan, Mekei Shira, Vishlakish, Amar Psula. And that is the Chiddush of Rav Yochanan, that a child born from a Mayavi and a Amayni into Klal Yisrael is going to be a kosher, a child in which Rish Lakish disagrees. Now the Gemara explains what's this machlekes Rish Lakish and Rav Yochanan, Rish Lakish and Rav Psula. The Alfami Kohen Gadol Ba'amana, just like Kohen Gadol Ba'amana is Be'eser, the child is possible. So too by us, the Amayni to the Basi Yisrael was Be'eser, so the child is possible. Rav Yochanan Amar Kshira, where does he get it from? As we turn over to Ayin Zayin Beis, you know where Rav Yochanan gets it from? The Tani Rav Zakeh Kamid Rav Yochanan ki Besula me'ama v'yikach isha. The pasuk says that a Besula, woman who never had relations, should be taken as a wife to the Kohen Gadol. Lahavi, this includes Giyaris Mikina Shikshera Lekuna. A unique chiddush that when we have a Giyaris Mikina, a Giyaris from her heritage, meaning a Giyaris that comes from parents who come from the same peoples, from both Amayni, both Mayavi, and Amayni and Mayavis have a ger. Mayavi and Mayavis have a ger. That child, a unique chiddush, Shikshera Likuna. That child is going to be kosher. V'amar lei, and Rav Yochanan says, Ani shoyne. I learned the brisa. Amav, May Amav. The Torah doesn't say Amav, it says May Amav. What does that teach? We love a Besula above me, Beis Hamimin. If you have a Besula that comes from Beis Hamimin, meaning if both of the parents are both Mayavi or both Amayni, it's going to be kosher to Kahuna. And you say the case is only a Geras Mikina, nothing else. So says the Gemara, this is why Rav Yochanan's going to hold the child's going to be kosher. Explains the Gemara. What did Rav Yochanan mean by the two nations? And what does it mean by two nations? It means that the Amayni, the male, the Mayavi, the male are aser, but the females are mutar. Hainu Geras Mikina, that's the regular case of Geras Mikina, in which her parents come from the same place. Elo be'amayni shenasa bas Yisrael, and that's the proof, that's the raya to Rav Yochanan. When an Amayni marries into Klal Yisrael, that's going to be the source of Rav Yochanan that he's going to hold. The pasuk is teaching us, Ki Besula me'ama v'yikach isha, explains Rav Yochanan. From here we learn that when an Amayni or a Mayavi marries into Klal Yisrael, and it's Beiser, they weren't allowed to. Yet the child that is born is going to be kosher to Kahuna. That is the sheet of Rav Yochanan, arguing on Reish Lakish, and Ula in the name of Rav Yochanan is coming along to teach us this chiddush. Ikadiamri, 10 lines down. First one line is Vika. Says the Gemara. Another way of learning the previous story. Amar le'ani shayna amav me'amav lavi b'sula abba mishnei hamin. Or me'am sheish b'shnei hamin, from a nation that has two nations. What does that refer to? Vat amit geres mekina v'sulai. Explains the Gemara. Ulahach lishna. Now according to this second lashon, bas mitzri sheinik diksher lekuna minalei. Where do we see that a second generation Egyptian who marries a Bas Yisrael is mutter kilukuna? Maybe we learn it out from this din of Rav Yochanan that the Amoni that marries Bas Yisrael, the child is kosher. So to a Mitzri Sheni that marries a Bas Yisrael, the child be kosher. Says the Gemara, no raya. Of course, the unique chiddush that we keep on seeing about Amoni and Mayavis in that the females are always kosher. Mitzri Sheni is not that way. Says the Gemara, if you have two second generations Mitzrayim that marry each other, then the daughter will be kosher. Says the Gemara, what's your raya? Ma'ala Mitzri Sheni going over to the wide lines. When Mitzri Sheni is together with a Mitzri Sheni, that relationship is a kosher relationship. So how could that prove to us from our din? Says the Gemara, and that's going to be the proof to Rav Yochanan that not only is a Mitzri, not only is it Amoni to a Bas Yisrael, the child kosher lekuna, even a Mitzri Sheni. Comes along the Gemara, 2 lines into the wide lines, and says, Rav Yosef, Rav Yosef, I know Shamanel Rav Yehuda. This is what is meant that I heard from Rav Yehuda saying, Amav, Damar, Amav, Mei Amav. The Torah does not say Amav, rather it says Mei Amav. I didn't know what it means, but now I learned what it means based off the top of the Gemara over here. Rav Yochanan learning out from this pasuk that the Moavi, the Amoni to a Bas Yisrael is kosher to Kehuna. Ki asa Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda Amar Hachi Tanakamei. He learned another way, a third way of learning this machlokes of Yochanan and Rav Zakkai. Isha Amoinis Keshera, a woman who is an Amoinis is kosher. Bina me Amoini psasel, but the child that came from her with a Amoini is pasel. Obita me Amoini Keshera, but the daughter from an Amoini, of course, is kosher, as we know, because Amoinis are Ksherais. B'medvar ma'amurim ba'amoini va'amoini shenizkairu. Avobita me Amoini Psula Chiddush, but a daughter born from Amoni is possible. Amar Lei, Rav Yochanan doesn't understand. Poik Tani Lebra, go and teach outside. Rav Yochanan explains why. My Damar Isha Amoni is Kshira, Amoni Vlaimon has been Amoni Puzzle, Damani Ubitim Amoni Kshira. So what are you talking about? The females are always supposed to be kosher. Lamai, what's referring to? Ilim Lava Bikal. Hash the Ima Kshira Yimi Bai. I don't understand. The mother is kosher, of course the daughter is kosher. Ela Likuna. Must be this whole din is not a stam din of Amoinis and Moavis marrying into Klal Yisrael. Rather, it's teaching us the din of marrying a Kohen. But Medvar Ma'amurim Ba'amoini Ba'amoini Sheniskairu Avobita Me'amoini Psula. Again, Psula, what does it mean? Psula, not Psula to Klal Yisrael, but rather Psula to a Kohen. My bita Me'amoini Ilema Amoini Shanasa Amoini Zainu Giyaris Mikina Ella Amoini Shanasa Bas Yisrael, and that's the same din that Rabbi Yochanan said above. And Amalei Poik Tani Lebra, go and teach outside. This is what he objects to. So 3 different ways of learning this give and take between Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Zakkai, which stemmed from the original din on Amud Aleph of Ula in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, in which he originally thought that the din was coming to teach us a Gioires of a Mayavis and a Mayavi that had a child. That child is going to be kosher likuna. The Gemara fell off of that answer, and the Gemara fell off and learned that no, it means in a Moavi and a Moini, a male Amoini and a Mayavi, which are also to marry to Klal Yisrael. But if they go and they marry a Bas Yisrael, what's the halacha, the chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan, learning out from the pasuk of the top of the Yamad of Kim B'Sula Me'amav Yikach Isha, that child will be allowed to marry a Kohen, in 3 different Lashonos exactly how to learn that. Let's just begin the next Gemara. The Gemara says, about 15 lines to the bottom, Mitri va'adaimi ino nasurim. That we saw in the Mishnah that the Mitri and the Adaimi are not asur, are are only asr until 3 generations. And when are they asr 3 generations? Both zacharim and nekevos. Whereas Rav Shimon in the Mishnah said, no, I don't understand, said Rav Shimon. If Amayni Amayavis, who the males are asr la'ilam, the females are mutter miyad right away. By the Mitzri and Adaimi, in which even the men are mutter after 3 generations, certainly the females are mutter right away. So says the Gemara, my tshuva, how do we answer Rav Shimon? Rav Shimon has a beautiful kasha. Rav Shimon saying a very sensible and logical idea that a Mitzri and Adaimi should, of course, to have the females being mutter right away. So explains the Gemara, the way to answer up is Kal V'Chaimer is Amar Rav Chanam Rav Yechnan Misham Deikal Meimar Arayis Yoichichu. And this is going to bring us all the way back to the nostalgic Daf Beis. The Arayis proved to us that what he said is not true. Shloasar Ben Elad Shloisha Dairis. Because the Arayis, when the Torah says one is not allowed to marry any of his relatives, it's really Midarayis, so only also until 3 generations. Echad Zacharim Ve'echad Nekevos. And even though Midarayis it's only asr to marry until 3 generations, daughter, granddaughter, etc. But it applies even to the nekevos. So we don't say that by the nekevos it's going to be mutter right away. So too is going to be the din by us. That's how the Rabbanan will answer up, Rav Shimon. Of course, we have to point out parenthetically it's lost or leilan va'in midrabanan, but on the Raisa level it's only 3 generations by the Rais. Ask the Gemara 1 second, Malaresh kin karis. How can you bring me a Rai from a Rais that it carries a very stringent punishment of karis? Explains the Gemara, Mamzer Yochiach. But Malam Mamzer shkin a roll of a Bekal. La'ilam, a Mamzer can never come into Klal Yisrael. Rais Yochiachu. Chazer din Larizel, Kirizev, Larizek, Kirizel, Sashav, Shem, Shasur, Ve'echad is Charim, Ve'echad Nekevos. The Aser, the Arayis, the Mamzerim are also both males and females and also come to Klal Yisrael and Yavi Mitzri Mitzres. So we learn out the din by a Mitzri, She Asur, Ve'echad Charim, Ve'echad Nekevos. They're both going to be Aser and it's going to be Aser until 3 generations. Not like Rav Shimon said that the females will be mutter right away. But ask the Gemara 1 second, Malas Hashav, Shem, Shekinish, and Sad Karis. All cases in the Tzad HaShaveh, both Mamzeris and the Arayis have an element of krisus into it. So how can you prove to us by Mitri where there is no element of krisus? Explains the Gemara, Rabbanan, Mechalal the Chayve Asay. We'll learn now from a Chalal who's an Isser Daraisa Chayve Asay, Rav Elazar ben Yaakov. But then says the Gemara, with this we're going to conclude, Umay Loi Ki. The Mishnah concluded that Rav Shimon concluded and said, even though I have a Kal V'Chaimer, Loiki, it's not true. Says the Gemara, Hachi Kamru, this is what's going on. Says Rav Shimon, Lidi di loy sphere leader of Elazar ben Yaakov. I don't hold Rav Elazar ben Yaakov. But Lidi is chud, is feel the chud of Elazar ben Yaakov. Still, halacha ani oimer. Said Rav Shimon, even if you're going to argue on my Kal V'Chaimer, I'm telling you, I have a Messiah. Halacha, I'm telling you, that's what I was mekabel, that the females are always going to be mutter miyad, even by a Mitzri and Adaimi, not only by Amoini and Mayavis. We'll pick it up in Mirta Hashem for the next Brisa and the next year.